I'll hand over to Professor Sir Peter Horby, who is the Director of the Pandemic Science Institute.
Great. Well, welcome everyone. It's great to be here in this lovely lecture theatre. It's a great event for which I've put on a jacket, which many of you won't have seen me in before, partly for the esteemed audience, but partly because I've dropped pasta sauce down my white shirt. So don't have spaghetti bolognese when you've got a white shirt and a presentation to give. And there's an echo. Maybe if the IT people can sort that out. Well, it's great to be here. We're just over 4 years since the pandemic was announced by WHO. And while in some ways that seems, a very long time ago, almost a lifetime ago, in other ways it kind of lives with each of us every day in different ways. And I think it's really important that we regularly reflect on what it was actually like back then, how, frightening it was, how difficult it was, how many people lost loved ones and had various traumas in various different ways. And to try and make sure that we I think, keep lobbying for work on these sort of existential threats for these infections. We mustn't forget, estimated 30 million excess lives lost, 16 trillion in economic losses, almost 2 billion children out of school, 250 people pushed into poverty, and we're still seeing the economic and social consequences now. So we really need to continue our focus. And I think it's our job really is to make sure that those things aren't forgotten and that they stay on the agenda for policymakers and for funders. But it's also important that we reflect on the good parts as well. The science was excellent. We really achieved something quite astounding, I think. Got to remember, lateral flow devices in every house, or actually boxes and boxes of them, something that would have been unheard of prior to the pandemic, where people were able to test themselves at home and isolate themselves and have access to high quality diagnostic tests for free. Vaccines in everyone's arms, apps on everyone's phones, treatments approved for use within 100 days of a trial starting. All of that, unheard of innovation and acceleration of science is something that we should be aspiring to do every day. But we should also think about how we can do even better than that. There was a lot of wasted resource. My particular area of work has been clinical trials. And the last time we looked, there were 450 clinical trials of treatments for COVID-19. And the median size of each of those trials was 100 patients, woefully inadequate, that none of those trials would achieve an answer. And a review done by the FDA estimated that 95% of those trials were designed to fail, not properly randomized, not enough patients. And so a huge waste of human resource and time for healthcare workers, a waste of trust of all the patients and their relatives who agreed to be in the trials without giving any evidence, and a waste of money, a big waste of money. So I think when we think about what we can do well and doing more of that, we also need to think about what we can do better. And so this is why I think the Pandemic Pact is very important, because clearly there was a need for much better global cooperation and coordination. So I think we need to think carefully about what are the next big questions, both for endemic health problems, but also big health security threats, not just infections, but others as well. How can we coordinate and cooperate better, not just nationally and regionally, but internationally, to make sure that, if we have a big question, it's an important question, we answer it once properly, not, 400 times badly. We need a couple of really good pieces of research that really give a definitive answer that allows us to move on. Either this works or it doesn't work, or perhaps it works in this context and that we need to do another trial to confirm that. So I think that's why the Pandemic Pact is important. It allows us to look at what the big research questions are and to look at who's funding what. And it allows a way for the research communities to coordinate. which is difficult because, in a sense, competition is built into a lot of the funding mechanisms. And there is rationale in that. There is benefits in competition, in driving up quality, supporting innovation. But at the same time, there is some space where competition is not a good thing, where you really need to cooperate for a global good, a common cause, and just get a good answer. And it doesn't matter who's the author on the paper or which institution leads. It's have we made a change, move the needle, and improve people's healthcare. So it's also another anniversary. So it's about 2 years since we launched the Pandemic Science Institute in the other lecture theatre just around the corner. And that was our attempt as scientists within the university and internationally to bring together all the disciplines to take forward the lessons that we learned from the pandemic, to try and take that exceptional praxis and innovation and make it routine. And it's been a great journey so far. We've got a really exciting program of work across vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics, social behavioural sciences, and also public health and public policy, of which Alice is the lead of the PSI group in policy and health practice. And so she's been very dynamic, pulled together a really good team and done some great work. And we're just about to hear about one of those pieces of work, the Pandemic PACT. So I'd like to welcome you all and introduce Alice.
Thank you, Peter. So it's great to be here at our launch event, much anticipated. So I will just give you an overview of what you're going to hear about now, which is going to start with me giving you an overview of the Pandemic PACT program, which we're launching today. Then we're going to really hear from the team. One of the pleasures of the Pandemic PACT program has been building a great multidisciplinary, very global team. So you'll have short talks from them to hear about all of the elements of that work. We've got a little bit of time for questions and answers around the work of Pandemic PACT, and we can certainly take some of them offline afterwards. We're then going to hear we're in the Blavatnik building. Pandemic PACT isn't the only tracker, and there was a great policy tracker run from the Blavatnik during the pandemic. So we'll hear a little bit about that from one of our new team members, Rodrigo, first. And then we're really excited about the panel discussion, which the chair of our advisory group, Nina Gobat, will be chairing for us. And that features many of our advisory group to really sort of look at Pandemic PACT in context and see what that means and what more we need to be doing for preparedness. So you've heard about the Pandemic Science Institute, and we're leading this program from there. But what's really important about Pandemic PACT is that it's a part of a partnership between global funding organisations. So the first of this is GloPID-R. So here think global group of funders who come together to improve the cohesion of the preparedness and research response for pandemics. And you'll hear from more about that from a board member and the Scientific Advocacy Director later. The other key partner in Pandemic PACT is the UK Collaborative on Development Research. So here we're looking at UK funders with a focus on development research. And it's really this positionality of this programme that gives its strengths and its hopeful reach in terms of impact. So where has this all come from? What we're really trying to answer is a kind of key question of how we improve the research response during outbreaks, in preparation for those outbreaks, and in response. And many people are looking in this area. This isn't a unique concept, but it really coalesced during COVID where the need was urgent. And these two organisations came together to form the COVID Circle Initiative, which I had the pleasure of leading. This initiative had many elements to it, around aligning funders to a set of principles. Many funders hadn't funded in this type of area before, looking at what best practice was, mapping and analysing. So GloPID-R and the WHO convened the COVID-19 Research Forum early in 2020 to set research priorities. What everyone realised was in order to align to those priorities, we needed really good visibility of what was being funded and how it aligned to those priorities. So that led to the UK CDR and GloPID-R funding tracking. tracker, and then analysis, sort of translating that into policy. What does that data mean? Where are the gaps? Where is the duplication? And a lot of COVID circle data then sort of filled that circle to really kind of go back to those policymakers and see how they were aligning or not to the principles they'd aligned to. The element of this that undoubtedly had the greatest reach was the funding tracking. And the impact of that informed decisions and analysis at our global funder level, at the WHO level, UN level, through feeding into reports for OECD and such like. So reflecting on that and reflecting on what we should take out of that, we consulted with our GloPID-R membership, global funders, to really see what we should do and whether there was a need for what Pandemic PACT is now trying to fill. And you can see some quotes here about how that work was used and discussions followed. So the mission that was agreed, again, with all these stakeholders for what we should do for Pandemic PACT was, wouldn't it be great to be able to track for these areas where we're going to need to make rapid funding decisions, this research prospectively, to align it to various research agendas, roadmaps for what much wider range of diseases, and have this a much more efficient process to evolve on from the wonderful Excel spreadsheet which powered COVID Circle, and really prospectively design something that would put us in a much better position for coordination prospectively, and to add into that an element of evidence synthesis and really ensuring that the priorities are living, that we're then tracking against. And that forms what we're attempting to do under Pandemic PACT. In terms of our users, we've obviously heard about the funder stakeholders. They're really key here. Researchers are also very key. So our COVID tracker was actually posted on over 50 research university and institute websites during the pandemic, where researchers were trying to coordinate, to collaborate. And so it was posted as a resource for them. We're also very keen to make our work interoperable with other data aggregators and players in this area. So Pandemic PACT has been very carefully positioned to hopefully not duplicate any other work and to ultimately feed its data through to all of that other complementary work. And then key is also this link, obviously, to policymakers, be they at the global level or even more importantly, at the local level at which these outbreaks are occurring. And you'll hear more perspectives on that from the panel later. So we have a great team. I'm going to get them to stand up shortly. We have a great team that's powering this work. We have an even more fantastic advisory group who met this morning, who are very supportive in terms of advising us and championing this work. Data consultation group, a lot of our work is with funder data, and we work very closely with them on that. And we have had a lot of fun over the last year or so, building broader partnerships to really improve this work going forwards. So we are kind of coming to the end of we've got 3 phases in the program coming to the end of the implement and pilot. So, we're launching not at the absolute outset of this program, but we're launching at a point at which we feel we really need to start sharing openly everything we've been developing. It will constantly be work in progress. The data set is constantly being built, but it is useful in the state it's currently in, and that's why we're starting now. Unfortunately for the whole world, outbreaks haven't waited for us. So you'll see a kind of list of reports here that we then also turned into publications. We get as a group, as the GloPID-R Research and Policy Group, our members turn to us when there is a new outbreak to ask us for evidence and data on what the research activity is, what the research gaps and what the needs are. And everything we've been building in Pandemic PACT is to try and improve our responses to that. We've also been working very closely with our Asia Pacific Hub and Africa Hub to help use our data to build and strengthen their networks and their prioritization. So Pandemic PACT has already delivered quite a lot, but what we're launching today is a kind of key milestone. So there is a nice, very nice, flashy website. We've got the web developers in the room, which links all of this together. But what we're launching is much more than that. We're launching a very comprehensive, unique data set on funding tracking data. We're launching results from our research prioritization work, which Amelia will speak to, machine readable metadata, the Pandemic PACT website, and the code openly available that underpins that website, a new protocol for our rapid research needs appraisal work, protocol for our funding tracking work, and a correspondence that came out at about 11 o'clock last night in the Lancet to describe the aims of this work. So the short talks from my colleagues shortly will hopefully bring this all to life. So part of a launch is to be in person, is to chat. So I'm going to start embarrassing some people and make this a living acknowledgement slide. So if all of the Pandemic PACT team based here can quickly stand up and give a wave. Yeah. Okay. And then some of you have already stood up are from our close colleagues at South African MRC. So if everyone else can sit down and we can hear, see, do. You can just wave if you want. And UK CDR, very strong partners. Just give a wave. Our web developers. for when we hope the website doesn't crash. The Go Fair Foundation online. Cochrane Response. Do we have anyone in the room from Cochrane Response? Yes, thank you. I won't make you stand up. But what I would really love is if in the reception afterwards, some conversations could be continued. Okay, so I'm going to pass over now to the team who are going to introduce each other, and we're going to run through some really quick updates, and then there'll be some time for questions, with thanks to our funders, obviously, which I won't skip over that slide. So this is Daniela Toll, who is our program manager for Pandemic PACT and was also our program manager for COVID Circle.
Great. So, sorry, bear with me one second. So today, well, Alice has already given my introduction. So I'm the program manager for Pandemic PACT and was with COVID Circle as well. And today, could we have them on the middle screens? Sorry, thank you. I'll be giving you a whistle-stop tour of our website, so the new Pandemic PACT grant tracker and some other functionalities. And sorry if I look down a couple of times because I've just got the screen here. So I won't be able to go through everything with you, but I would encourage you in your own time to please look over the website. So here's our homepage, and you can see that we have the summary data at the front. So we have over 6,800 grants from 77 global funders, worth over $7 billion currently in our data set. And you'll also see here that we have an open access statement. So all visualizations and data produced by the Pandemic PACT team is open access and under a Creative Commons BY license. And also all the code and software used to write the website is available on GitHub under an MIT license. And we endeavor as we go forward to put more code onto that GitHub. So now I'll show you the data dashboard, and you can do that by clicking the Visualize button. Just here. There we go, sorry. So on if we zoom out, okay. There we go. So on the left-hand toolbar here, you'll see that we have filters. And if, for instance, I can filter by disease, so I can click Zika. Here we go. And you'll see that we have 358 grants then filtered. And these are global filters. So these will apply to all visualizations on this web page. And you can click Clear All here. And we also have advanced search filters. So these are additional coding that the team has done, have been refined from COVID Circle as well. You can also minimize the toolbar, and then you can see here on the front that we have 5 cards. And these jump you to the visualizations which are relevant to those topic areas. So for instance, I'll go geographical distribution. And here we have the global map of funding organizations or research locations. And again, you can toggle between the research institution and the funder here. And you can also look at it at country level or WHO region level here. And with all of our visualizations, we have ways that you can visualize it, or the format is different. So we have here that you can also see the data in a bar chart. So here on the bar chart, you can see the known financial commitments with US dollars for the different WHO regions. And if you'd like to see it at the country level, you can click there, and then you can see it for all the countries within that region. And if you scroll down more, you'll see that in all visualizations, you can export that data as well. So you can either do it via exporting the chart image or by exporting the chart data, and that can be in a CSV file. Another interesting visualization I'd like to show you is regional flows. So this looks at funding flows from the funder region to the research institution, and then where the research is actually being conducted. And you can see that at the total numbers of grants, but also via the US dollars committed. And it's important to note here that this is only when that information has been provided by the funder. So now what I'll take you to is for searching the grants, the individual grants. So I'll just move this here. Okay, so if we click the Explore here, you'll see that there's a number of ways of exploring the individual grants on the data set. So we have prescribed search filters here, and we also have advanced searches. So this allows you to use those filters with Boolean operators. And then we have a keyword search. And again, with this keyword search, we have the option of using search operators with it. And you can learn more about that in the eye just in the corner here. So for this exercise, I'll type in vaccine, for example. And then if we scroll down, you'll see that we have 1,161 grants which talk about vaccines. And if you scroll down, you can, I'll say that you can download the filtered data here, or you can download the full data set there. So this just gives you a kind of high-level overview of what's in the grant. But if you'd like to see that in more detail, you can click the See Full Grant Record here. And then at the top here, it'll tell you the grant name, who's funded it, the publications associated with it, and those have been directly retrieved from EuropeMC via an API pipeline, and then also the grant number. What you'll also see if you scroll down is the key facts. So this dark turquoise is what's been derived from the funders themselves. And then in the light turquoise, you can see what's taken or derived from the coding team. And this is when they've reviewed the grants, the grant abstracts and lay summaries, for example. And then if you scroll down, we have the abstract, which you can read in full, and then more information about the publications associated. So you can see that there. And we have links which take you directly to EuropeMC if you want to explore that in more detail. So what I'll do now is I'll talk through a couple other features of the website here. So at the top, we have RRNAs, and that stands for Rapid Research Needs Appraisals. And that's led by my colleague, Dr. Louise Siegfried, who will talk about this later. She's over there. But for the moment, I'll just say on the website, we have an overview and introduction about the RRNAs. And then in subsequent when we develop the website further, we're looking to add visualizations also to this page. Then we've got publications. So these are all outputs related to the Pandemic PACT program, but also to our predecessor COVID Circle. And these are things like journal articles and blogs, etc. And then on the About, so we have an overview of the program, and we have a Meet the Team. You can learn more about our collaborators, partners, and funders. And then we also have a section here called Our Data. So this is all the metadata associated with the program. And again, I won't have time to talk about that now, but I would encourage you to all explore this in more detail later. So I think that's it for the Whistle Stop tour. Thank you for listening. I will stop sharing here and take you back to the presentation. And on here, there's a QR code. So if you want to get your phones out, you can scan that and it'll take you directly to the website so you can have a play around. Thank you for listening, and I'll pass now to my colleague, Dr. Emilia Antonio, who will be talking about research prioritization. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. So my name is Emilia Antonio. I am a research and policy officer with the PACT team. I've been working on the funding tracking data and the analysis for about 4 years now. I'll be talking you through today some work that we're doing on research prioritization in preparedness and response to outbreaks. So this work began with the GloPID-R's Research and Low and Middle Income Countries Working Group. And the goal of the working group some time ago was to look at what lessons can be learned from priority setting during the pandemic. So we went through a series of different activities. We developed case studies, we did some surveys of our GloPID-R membership, and we developed this report where we have some recommendations outlined on how to develop and apply research priorities. So there's not a lot of time to go through this, but the report is available online, and I'd encourage you to look at it some more. So while doing this work, we identify that there's a gap in the evidence for priority setting in the context of epidemic and pandemic-prone infectious diseases. So we set out to scope the literature as to what is out there on research priority setting on high consequence pathogens. We've published the protocol, and the detailed methodology of this is in there. But the scope of the pathogens that we looked at are the same ones that we are tracking under Pandemic PACT, plus some additional ones that are of regional scope. So the objectives of the scoping review were to look at what the published evidence there is in with respect to priority setting activities for high consequence pathogens, look at what methodologies have been used in setting these priorities, and to identify, if any, where there are monitoring and evaluation processes in place to look at how progress is tracked against these priorities. So I'm just sharing a few results. This isn't published yet. We are close to submitting this for publication. So we identified publications that are related to 17 different pathogens, and it's not surprising that most of them have to do with COVID-19. But if you disregard COVID, you'll see that the focus was on those pathogens that cause major outbreaks. A whole variety of different approaches were identified. I think the common thing in the different approaches that we looked at was that they all involved some expert consultation. However, the detail of who those experts are or the rationale behind them being included in the priority setting process was not as clear. And because there was also limited reporting on how exactly the priorities were arrived at. We also found very limited information on any plans at all to monitor progress against the priorities that had been set. And so what all this shows, taking our results together, is how there is a need for better harmonization on how priorities are set in this context of epidemic and pandemic-prone infectious diseases. Just a few more results. So a lot of the publications we looked at were targeting the global scope, but a few that we found that were national, they were based on priority set for either the US or Canada or the UK. This is an interesting one where we looked at mapping the time from the declaration of a public health emergency of international concern to the earliest available research prioritization agenda based on the date that it was published. And you'll see that the trend is generally downward from 2019 till COVID, but then it goes up for mpox. And there are many interesting ways that we could describe what trend that we are seeing here. So just moving on quickly to how does all this tie into the work of Pandemic PACT and our research. So when we started the work on the scoping review first, we wanted to identify which pathogens we were going to include within the review. And so we did a lot of searches of various global, regional, and national priority pathogen lists. And some of that work informed what we've arrived at now as the diseases that we are tracking under Pandemic PACT. The other thing was that to be able to track the diseases that we are looking at in order to identify where the research gaps are, we will be mapping in Pandemic PACT the projects that we have against a standard way of categorizing diseases. So early on in the scoping review, we looked at the data in an attempt to identify if there are any standardized way of classifying research on epidemics and pandemics, but we didn't find any. So we set out to develop one for Pandemic PACT again. So we went through a series of processes, importantly using the lessons that we had learned from doing this under COVID Circle, and also scoping the literature again, and then with input from our external consultations and also from our PACT advisory group, we arrived at these 12 research category areas to which we will be mapping the projects under Pandemic PACT. Each of these has additional subcategory areas to which the data that we have will be assigned to one or more of the categories. I'm happy to chat about the process a little more during the tea breaks. So here are the acknowledgements, and I will be passing you on to Elena. She'll talk you through the data and the database. Thank you.
Hello, thank you all for coming. My name is Elena Semenog, and I'm a senior researcher on the Pandemic PACT. I will start my timer here because I only have 6 minutes, and a very challenging task to tell you everything about the data behind the Pandemic PACT project. So I will start with a FAIR. FAIR is a principle in data science. Some of you might have heard about it, some of you might not. But this is a way to reduce the waste in research and to stop researchers in different groups around the world reinventing the wheel and doing the same research. This set of principles was set up and in the research community, but it's been pushed forward by a number of funders. And when we started our project, the funders asked us to make our data fair by design. So before we built a data set, we had a very intense 2-day workshop in Annecy. All right, we had a very intense workshop in Annecy where we met with our collaborators, with the GloPID-R Foundation, the partners. And they taught us about the FAIR principles. So FAIR principles, they include 4 main pillars. So the data should be findable, they should be accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And these principles are applied to the data themselves and to all the metadata created alongside the database. This was a new approach for many of us, but we knew that that with the Pandemic PACT data, we are going to follow the highest standards, and this is what we are going to implement. So after the workshop, we had a basic idea of what we are going to do. Thankfully, the GloPID-R Foundation stayed with us, and they really guided us through the whole process of verifying our data. They were funded, our collaboration was funded by a Dutch funding organization, ZoneMV, and they're really pioneering this approach with the idea that the data collection, the grants and the data collection will be automated in the future. And Pandemic PACT is one of the first, maybe not first, but one of the pioneers in verifying funding databases on funded research projects. As I said, we want to make our data interoperable and really integrated within databases of different funders and other databases that some of them might be related to funding, others are not related to funding at all. They could be databases with demographic characteristics, geographical databases, whatever. But to achieve interoperability, the data have to be standardized. And we know that it is hard to achieve it, but it is possible if you really put an effort into that. So to make our data interoperable, we used standardized vocabularies, we used ontologies, nomenclatures. For example, we use to code diseases that we include in our database. We use a SNOMED classification, and I think we are probably one of the first trackers of the sort who are actually using a code behind the data. Then we use standard list of research funders, research funding organization, and research institution. So I think I have to move to the next slide because I have a limited time. But as you understand, this is the foundation of our data. Then this is the data flow. This PowerPoint explains how the data go into the database and what happens next. So FAIR data is the principle, and this is the process. So the main data source of the Pandemic PACT are online websites and platforms of the funding organization. So we go to the website and we scrape the data. This is not done manually. It's all done automatically using a code, and the code goes at the back end of the website and scrapes the data. For some funders who don't have online platforms or good websites, we receive data input directly. To understand who is going to present data in what format. We had to do consultations, and we got the feedback what would be the preferential data supply route. And we follow this. We follow the structure. So once the data are very diverse, they're unstructured. So they come into our team of research assistants, researchers, and a data manager, Thomas Mendy, who is absolutely fantastic and doing phenomenal job. So Thomas structures. He puts all this data in a structured format. They become unified. They become standardized, and then these standard data are pushed into RedCap. So RedCap is a software which is very user-friendly. At the stage of the RedCap, a team of research assistants reviews all the data, and they do the data curation. So they they fill boxes with fields, or they fill boxes with variables and values. After the RedCap, the database is put on a Figshare. Figshare is a public platform, so anyone can access the data. We're not hiding anything. And from the Figshare, the data goes straight into the dashboard. So there is no middle there. So the data that you saw visualized on the dashboard, they are the same data as the data set on the Figshare. Figshare also has some metadata, and in addition to the Figshare, we have our metadata as a standardized vocabulary on a different platform, which can be accessed by machines. So not just the human users, but the artificial intelligence and data mining can be implemented on our data using these machine-readable formats. Innovate is the team who created the dashboard for us, so thank you very much. In our processes, with our data, we do a lot of data curation. So we receive the data, and then we really want to make sure that the data are of the highest quality, and they are grouped and they are systematically put into different buckets so that we can align them to roadmaps, we can align them to frameworks, we can link them to external databases and external sources. For example, we link all the grants through the Europe PubMed to publications. Then across our data, we use cross-sectional tags, which help us to identify grants that belong to a certain category. So for example, digital or innovation or gender, and these are interdisciplinary cross-cutting tags. So if someone is interested in grants that are concerned with gender aspect of the infectious diseases, they can just tick a box and they will see all those grants. So this work has been done for the users by our research assistants and the team. All right. These are our collaborators, and I think I will stop at this point. We work closely with people at the university. We work with the Department of Engineering. We work with external consultant, Georgie, who is here in the audience. And the next presenter is our colleague from the engineering department, Omid Rohanyan, who is unfortunately cannot be here, but he recorded his presentation, so we can all listen to what he has to say. Thank you very much.
Hello everybody, my name is Omid Rohanyan and I'm a Senior Research Associate at the Computational Health Informatics Lab as part of the Department of Engineering Science at the University of Oxford. My research is about natural language processing and artificial intelligence, and within the Pandemic PACT project in the last year or so, I have been tasked with the integration of AI into the pipeline of the project. A project with the magnitude of Pandemic PACT has to deal with a large number of research projects. Manual categorization of these projects suddenly becomes a challenge when you deal with a vast data influx. AI and machine learning has the ability to automate part of this process and expedite it by identifying patterns and suggesting annotations to the human annotators. In this way, we can say that we're using AI as strategic aid to complement the work of our team. And this way we can streamline analysis in order to spotlight research funding trends and key gaps. Using this figure, we can schematically show this human-in-the-loop process, using which AI generates draft annotations, which can act as a first-pass filter. These undergo human evaluation. Using the expert review, we can feed this information back into the model by modifying our input and then revise the output again. And this loop continues until we reach a high standard of accuracy. This collaborative model can boost efficiency and maintain data quality. The technology we are using for the AI component of the work is called large language models, or LLMs for short. These are advanced AI systems that are designed to understand, interpret, and generate human language. They have been trained or pre-trained on vast amounts of data. This gives them the ability to discern complex linguistic relationships and structures and also follow instructions, which is a very valuable asset. This is very useful because we can use that to automate certain tasks, including classification, and in our particular case, classifying biomedical texts. This can potentially enhance data analysis. The way to interact with a language model is through a prompt. A prompt is a textual query that formulates the problem. In our case, the prompt has the following structure. We first list all the research categories and their nuances, and we provide examples to teach the model about the task. Technically, this is called few-shot learning or in-context learning. In the end, we specify the expected format for the output. So as you can see in the figure, the prompt is fed into the model and the generated text is the output. We need to do a bit of post-processing to extract the intended output. As was previously outlined by my colleague Emilia, we have a number of research categories that we want to map to the projects that we are considering. In terms of machine learning, this is a multi-label classification with primary or main and secondary categories for each case. But not all of the projects have both categories. The bar plot in the middle shows the distribution of projects with multiple categories. The ratio is 1:3. In other words, most of the projects are single category for which there is no secondary category. Hopefully the model would pick up on this during the classification process, because this is specified in the prompt and by using the examples. The input to the classification model is primarily based on abstract and title. We only use very limited metadata for bookkeeping purposes, but the decision to map each project to categories is solely happening using the textual input, the title and the abstract. Earlier I mentioned that we use a human-in-the-loop evaluation process to get feedback from the human annotators and iteratively build on top of that. We use both qualitative and numerical evaluation to make sure that the outputs of the model are practically useful. Qualitative evaluation involves working closely with our human annotators and asking them for feedback regarding the quality. We would ask the question, is the model output practically useful? If the model noise is too much, then we try to identify the patterns in which the model went wrong, and then we would go and revise the prompt structure to make sure that the outputs are better. So that's one way of doing it. We also can use numerical evaluation that we have already, using some of the standard metrics that you can see listed here, to also have a better idea of where the model fails and where we are standing with regards to model performance. We have already processed 2 batches of data. One was 500 projects, the other more than 2,000. We have already received the feedback from our annotators regarding these 2 batches, and we continually develop the model to become better and better based on the feedback that it receives. To wrap up, we will continue to rerun some of these experiments based on the feedback that we receive. We consider experimenting with different open source models in a GDPR compliant way. And one of the things that we will consider going forward with the team would be streamlining the data flow so that models can be continually run in a semi-autonomous way. And we will also consider fine-tuning the models on the gold standard annotated parts in order to make the performance better, because at the moment we are using the models in a frozen way and relying on the internals of the model and the prompt only for the outputs. I would like to extend my gratitude to all the individuals and organizations who have helped this element of the work. And on that note, I would like to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Louise Siegfried, who will now talk about the Rapid Research Needs Appraisal. Thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, hi everyone. Nice to see so many people here today. So I'm going to talk about the Living Rapid Research Needs Appraisal, RNA platform for priority diseases that we're establishing alongside with the funding tracker as part of Pandemic PACT. And this is a project that we are developing in collaboration with Cochrane Response, Cochrane South Africa, and our team at the PSI, and also with some of external consultations with external advisors, some of them who are here today. Ellie Harris, our information specialist, who's been supporting us for many years. And also like to mention Vincent Cheng, our methodologist from Bristol University. And we also have other external disease and multidisciplinary experts helping to advise us. So it's all very collaborative, our work. So the aim of this platform is to identify existing published evidence on priority diseases, to identify gaps in the evidence base, to help inform research prioritization and coordination. Which is this one? Sorry. Okay, so why are we developing an RNA? So we've seen from past that the traditional systematic evidence reviews often take up to 12 months to complete, time that's not available during outbreaks. And even rapid evidence reviews often take up to 1 to 9 months to complete. So we've identified in response to outbreaks previously, there was a need to develop a rapid and more transparent and also robust method to more rapidly be able to synthesize or appraise the published evidence and in preparedness time and during outbreaks, again, to identify the evidence gaps to inform research prioritization and coordination and more coordinated research strategies. And we've also, as we all seen during the COVID pandemic, are aware that we need to be better and more rapid in appraising evidence and sorting the facts from fiction. So the Living RNA platform, so we're addressing this by establishing a Living RNA platform using, prompts here to stay on target. So to establish an RNA platform, and it's aligned with the funding tracking categories. And we're using a global relay system. So we have systematic reviewers based in different time zones globally to optimize resources and also bringing in different skills, mix, and experiences. And they are supported by systematic review software to reduce need for lengthy handovers and automation where possible. So this is building on a project with Peter Horby and was involved in establishing the idea in 2017. So we've developed the method in 2017 together with Cochrane Response and Evidence Aid UK. And we piloted it at the time on Lassa fever. And that's just to illustrate some of the results from this pilot, where we identified 118 articles. But as we can see from the table here presenting in the left-hand side, you can see the key domains that was included in the protocol at the time. And at the top, we've presented studies we identified by study designs. So as we can see here, most of the 118 articles are observational studies of lower evidence level. And we only identified one study presenting data on drug therapy. So despite Lassa fever causing regular outbreaks in endemic countries, the highest level of evidence we identified at the time was a non-randomized controlled study set in Sierra Leone, which studied the effect of ribavirin and convalescent plasma in patients admitted with Lassa fever. And as we can see, that was from 1986, so more than 30 years earlier. So we're now refining this method by incorporating lessons learned from the COVID pandemic and using use of new technological advancements And we're aligning our research domains to the funding tracking domain. So this is a circle showing the funding tracking domains illustrated earlier, and that the RNA evidence gap method are aligning to 9 out of the 12 funding categories. Okay, so we piloted this protocol with our new team and our new refined method in the autumn. We piloted on Henipa viruses. And as you can see here by the table, again, we see a similar picture of, even though we've identified 84 articles, most were of lower level of evidence, observational studies, and we only identified 1 article exploring therapeutics set in 2001. So again, highlighting that these diseases that are re-emerging, causing regular outbreaks, there's lots of gaps in the evidence base. So what we're doing now over the next 6 months is we're going to establish the RNA platform for the priority diseases, and presenting the baseline platform. We will disseminate the data on the PACT database so that we can see what the existing evidence exists, and then align that to what's being funded to help identify the gaps and to inform research prioritization and coordination. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Louise. So I think we're running on time. So we've got about 10 minutes now for questions. And I've got a very fancy device here to give me the questions from online. But I'd really like to start with any questions that there might be in the room. And I'll pass on as many of them as I can to the team and answer any of the more tricky ones. So there's mics around the room. So anyone who would like to start with a question, Hans, you're on the panel, but you can. Yes, please go ahead, Hans.
Very quick question, perhaps very naive. Why are only 9 out of the 12 alignable? Wouldn't it be better to have all 12 aligned between RNA and the other part of the system of Pandemic PACT? It's naive, I know, but.
It's okay. It's a good question. I'll take in a few questions and then I'll distribute them about the team. But Louise, you know that one's coming your way. Peter.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah. I'll shout. It's about the research, the rapid research needs appraisal again. I remember when we did the LASA pilot, it was a huge amount of work to assimilate all of the data. Is there any automation for screening of that being built in through some methods we've heard about?
That's great. Very good question, Peter. Anyone else in the room? I'll take a third one. Yeah, please go ahead, Philippa.
Is it only English used on the tracker, or are there capacity for other languages?
Okay, great. Very good question. All right, we'll pause there. Louise, I'm going to ask you to come up here where the microphone is because people are online. There's a couple more online that are to do with the RNAs, so I'll just add them in. There's one which I think is relevant is, are the RNAs just reactive to an outbreak, or is there an element of preparedness? Here is a question coming in. I'm summarizing it, but I think that's the question that Mary De Silva is asking online. So she's saying, is it better to look at the gaps in preparedness rather than responding? So we'll start with those RNA group questions, and then I'll move, Thomas, the language questions coming your way.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so very relevant questions. I'll start with Hans' question. The reason we kind of links with Peter's question as well. The reason we started with the 9 domains is that the RNA is more resource intensive than the funding tracker, in that we have to appraise the published evidence, which comes, as we saw, often on lower evidence, low quality of the publication, etc. So it's less harmonized the data. So it's a little bit more resource intensive. So we're building from what the method we developed in 2017, which was focused on including research that includes human samples. So we are currently not covering the animal research, which the tracker is also covering, which we'd like to expand to, but it would require a little bit more resources. And also coming over to Peter, so we're also looking at how we can automate it today when we have better technologies, and there's already some steps in terms of helping with the screening of articles, and so the identification, the search with Ellie Harris, our information specialist, is leading on. It's not the resource limiting step. Is there sorting the facts from fiction almost, or a screening and data extraction. So we're looking at incorporated automated method as far as possible. But as we find, you still need a human eye to quality assess it, the data. So that's work in progress. And then also we'll look at if we have resources to expand into the One Health sphere. Thank you. Okay. And yeah, also preparedness time. So yes, over to you. Sorry. Yeah. So yes. So sorry if that wasn't clear. Yes, we're setting this up now. So recognizing from our pilot with Lassa fever, and from the COVID pandemic, and from our responding to outbreaks when people need data rapidly, obviously it'd be good to do this in preparedness time. So we're establishing the baseline data for the priority diseases to start with, while we're also building the capability and our global teams capability to rapidly respond to any outbreaks. And we also have a living protocol. It's adaptable, so we can all rapidly adapt it. We can target it to fewer domains if needed, or expand it, etc., depending on disease. And as part of that, in terms of searching for evidence, we also search for peer-reviewed evidence and also grey literature. So for each disease, we reach out to the disease experts and others and checked with grey literature databases to include in our search. So for the Henipa viruses, we search the region where we know their public health databases, etc. So it's also living an adaptable protocol. So the idea is to establish a baseline and then be ready to update it. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Thanks. Thomas, do you want to come down and ask the language one? And then I've got a nice group of ones around research prioritization coming in as well.
Okay.
So let me just introduce Thomas, because Thomas is a key member of the team who wasn't one of the speakers, but is our research data manager. So for all the funders in the room, Thomas now knows the front end and the back end of your data much better than you would like anyone to know. And I think can tell you all the issues with that. So.
Yeah. Hi guys. With regards to the question about the language, so we do translate most of the grants that we bring in into our system from the original language to English, so that the coders will be able to understand what the abstract said, so that they will be able to mark them to the right tags. However, we do also keep the original language. So if you look at in the main data set, you will be able to see both the original language and the translated language. And with part of the plan, in terms of the cycle times, we're looking at also trying to look for some cycle times. Right now, we're using a broad cycle times in general, but we've talked about instances whereby some of these diseases might be different. I mean, in language, might be written in their original languages. So it's also part of the plans to be able to incorporate them in our cycle times, such as well.
Thank you, Thomas. We've got a couple of linked ones coming in online, which is a common theme around one from UK HSA. Really interesting to hear about the results of research priority setting, and lots of people are working on this. Are we planning to carry out any research prioritization using the data from within PACT? And then that is along the same lines as another question which has disappeared from my fancy iPad, which was from the audience, which was about the extent to which our data was being used to show funders that they should stop funding things they were funding. But I think both of these really sort of speak to what is the use of this data. So we've described everything we've presented here in quite a prospective way. The database is just launching, but hopefully you'll have got an impression from what we described on the COVID work that the purpose of this is use of this data, and that a lot of the Pandemic PACT team, once the efforts of building the database are complete, is going to be around both we're promoting the use of the data by making it fair, interoperable, open, so that people can use it themselves, funders can use it themselves. But we will also be undertaking plenty of analyses, both living cross-cutting ones, but also bespoke ones for our stakeholders to inform their decision-making. And importantly, that links to the fact that we will be aligning this data. You'll see there's a nice card on the website, anyone who's had a chance to look, which is policy roadmaps and research agendas. Okay, so that is the next step, that our data will be aligned to a range of different roadmaps and research agendas to track progress against them and inform this evidence-based decision-making around research priorities linked to them. So those are very pertinent questions coming in. How are we doing for time? Okay, we're gonna wrap up the questions now, but all those of you in the room have the opportunity now, we've pointed out who everyone is in the room, to take your questions into the reception afterwards. So the next thing I want to do is introduce my colleague, Dr. Rodrigo, first. We are delighted that Rodrigo is now working in our team as a postdoctoral scientist, but Rodrigo previously worked on the Blavatnik policy tracker, and we thought it would be really useful to have that perspective in this discussion, and he'll highlight the linkages. So over to you, Rodrigo. Thanks.
Thank you, Alice, and hello, everyone. So today I'm briefly talk about the Oxford COVID-19 response tracker and how its lessons can inform our work at Pandemic PACT. So before joining Pandemic PACT, I used to work and collaborate with the Oxford COVID-19 government response tracker since its very beginning. I started as a project volunteer. I was a first year PhD student at the time. And then I became a research assistant. And then suddenly I got a data science position where I was responsible for overseeing not only the data collection, but also the documentation and the dissemination of the project data. So for these years, collaborating with the government's response tracker, I could experience how challenging it is to work amidst a global outbreak. So from every aspect of our work, from the challenges of data collection to the importance of data dissemination and community engagement, every aspect of this work highlighted the importance of being prepared for future outbreaks. So today is like very, very special for me to be back to the BSG and briefly draw some parallels between the Oxford COVID-19 government response tracker and our Pandemic PACT team, and try to leverage some of the lessons that we can learn and enhance our processes. So the Oxford COVID-19 government response tracker was created by Professor Thomas Hale, who is now the director of the Master in Public Policy program here at the Blavatnik School of Government, and also Professor Anna Patrick, who is also a professor here at the MPP. So the OXCGRT tracked government response to COVID-19 in 185 countries, plus approximately 200 subnational regions in countries such as the United States, the UK, Brazil, India, China, to name a few. And we collected data from the very first day of 2020 to the very last day of 2022. So as it is... Stay a bit close to the microphone. Oh, sorry. Thanks for the heads up, Alice. So the data, as it is now, the data includes 25 indicators, which are grouped in 4 different groups of indicators, including containment closure policies, economic policies, health policies, and vaccine policies. However, it wasn't how it started in the beginning. So, for instance, just to give an example, in the beginning, we not even had, for instance, the facial covering policies, since we were not very popular at the beginning. We were only introduced like 3 months after the outbreak. And just to give an illustration, we only include this policy at the very first, at the second half of the 2020. Another very good example how we have to adapt with the changing circumstances of a pandemic outbreak. There was a time when the vaccination rollout was about to start. The governments started to implement policies targeted at individuals with different vaccination status. So, for instance, we have policies targeted at people that are not vaccinated as compared to people vaccinated. And then we also have to adapt all the coding guidance and the structures to the coding team so that they could adapt to the real circumstances that were happening at that time. So in order to achieve this very ambitious project, we rely on a team of over than 1,500 volunteers spread all across the globe. And it was like very, very ambitious process in which we had like weekly meetings, very structured training material to kind of like try to make as collaborative effort that we could to make this project possible. And this is the kind of thing that we're also trying to do in Pandemic PACT in terms of having like a very good documentation, good training for the coders, so that we can have like as much as comparable and reliable data as we can. And at the Oxford COVID-19 tracker, government tracker, as for the Pandemic PACT, we have this policy of data sharing and open source data. So all of this, the data that that goes into our data set comes from public sources, and all of them can be easily accessed through our platforms. All the documentations, all the changes that we made through the process are pretty much well documented, and everyone can see, not only for relying on doing the research, but also for replication purposes. So in terms of impacting and engagement, the data set of the government response tracker has been cited by more than 2,000 times and referenced by by prime ministers and seniors of UN officials, for instance. So the Pandemic PACT also has this aim. It emulates the success of the XCGRT in terms of enhanced global collaboration for future outbreaks. And the government response team also worked with the UK Cabinet Office, the World Bank, UN, WHO, to name a few. And us in Pandemic PACT also aim at leveraging these collective efforts and actually actively engage with different stakeholders, including funders, international organizations, researchers and policymakers, just to name a few, to also be more prepared for future pandemic outbreaks and enhance our collaborative efforts so that we can be more prepared. So lastly, I would like to thank not only Tom and Anna, who developed the tracker and led this very ambitious process, but also to the whole team that worked with the tracker team, and also the volunteers that without them, that project wouldn't be possible. And just one last thing, if you guys want to access the data, not only the data, but learn a little bit more about the government tracker, you can also use the QR code here, and that will direct you straight to the website so that you can take a look at the data and also at the documentation and all of the process that were involved in the data collection process. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Rodrigo. Okay, so now the PACT team get a little bit of a break, and we're handing over to a panel, which is made up of many of our advisory group members, but is going to be ably chaired by Dr. Nina Gobat from the World Health Organization, who is actually the chair of our advisory group. So over to you, Nina, to organize your panel. And I think you're all mic'd up, so please come down.
Thanks, Alice.
All right, so very warm welcome to everybody who's on the panel, to everybody who's in the room, to everybody who's online. It's my pleasure to be here today, and it's really been super to hear about the development work of this tool, which is really quite a unique tool, and to hear about the attention to detail in developing a tool that is trustworthy, using the FAIR principles, and also relevant to the end user. And in this panel today, as Alice said at the start, we're going to be thinking about Pandemic PACT in context, but critically, we're also going to be thinking about how can this tool be used by the end user. And I'm going to start by inviting Oliver Morgan, who is joining us online from the airport in Berlin, hoping that he does indeed come online. Oliver, do we have you?
I mean, I'm online. I hope you can hear me.
Thank you. We can hear you. We can't see you. Now we can see you. Thank you for making the time to join us from Berlin, and I'm sorry you're not able to join us in person. But I will start the panel with a question to you, which is, if we think back to COVID-19 and the lessons that have been learned about the use of evidence during that event, what are some of your key takeaways? What do you think some of the key lessons are that we need to carry forward?
Yeah, thanks, Nina. I mean, really, there's so many lessons, and as Peter mentioned in his remarks, I think we're still kind of digesting the experience and identifying what some of those lessons might be. I think from a WHO perspective, we've had actually quite a number of reviews of certainly the work that we did and some of the major challenges. That's resulted in a consolidated set of about 300 different recommendations across the whole spectrum of the pandemic response, everything from detection and surveillance through to medical countermeasures and communications. And all of those recommendations have actually been published online. They're available through the WHO website. I think actually is a very interesting resource for trying to at least start digesting about some of those lessons and some of those major issues identified. I think from a surveillance, public health surveillance perspective, which is the area that I work in particular, I think it's everybody's experience, regardless of where in the public health ecosystem you work, whether it's a local level, a national level, a regional or a global level. I think everybody felt that we could have done more and could have done better, and that there are plenty of opportunities to improve. And that is actually the kind of genesis of us creating our new office in Berlin. We've set up a hub in Berlin really started at the beginning of 2022, and with the intention of working with partners around the world to really build a much stronger public health surveillance ecosystem. That includes countries, of course, helping countries to strengthen their systems, but also working with a number of other partners. And I think this is one of the key takeaways from the pandemic in all areas, but certainly in surveillance, is that while the government effort is important, there are many other actors and partners in this space, increasingly so, that are super important as well. And I think the presentation and the initiative of the Pandemic PACT is a really important one and a really good example where our concept of surveillance is broadened beyond just the, let's say, traditional epidemiologic understanding of what is surveillance of cases and deaths of a certain disease to a whole range of different aspects of pandemic and epidemic response.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. And thank you for making reference to the many, many recommendations and to the newer frameworks that we're working under, because I think these are important pieces related to the context. To drive better health emergency responses, we need better evidence. And we need better evidence we need better insight over what projects have been funded and how can we draw forward the learnings and the insights from those working on those projects across a wide range of disciplines. So thanks very much, Oliver, for bringing that perspective. I'm going to come to Maggie. Maggie. My apologies, Bob. Maggie, from your perspective, UKCDR, what did you see during COVID-19 in terms of the use of evidence, and what are some of the key lessons from your perspective?
Thank you. I'm green. Thank you, Nina. You can hear me. So good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Maggie Hines. I'm Executive Director of UKCDR. So UKCDR has been featured on all the slides. We worked with GloPID-R at the start of the pandemic to develop the COVID tracker. And it's great to see now how we've moved from an Excel spreadsheet to a fancy website and all the data and the hard work that is behind. Just to put UKCDR in a bit of context. So UKCDR, we are not a funder, but we are a collaborative on development research. So we are a collaborative working with research funders who have an interest and fund research for international development. So we don't focus solely on global health research, but we just tackle the whole of research for international development landscape. And I think what I would like to reflect on today, based on what we've heard and also the experience since joining UKCDR, is the importance of coordination and ensuring that coordination mechanisms are in place. So we work with 5 research funders and we provide them similarly with data. Data mapping is a large pillar of our strategy for the exact purpose of ensuring that there is coordination amongst funders, that there's no waste of resources, and that we do have this continual dialogue within funders and intelligence gathering to ensure that there is no waste of resources, that we analyze trends and gaps, and that we direct the funding where it's necessary. So the role of UKCDR in that landscape is to provide funders with evidence-informed decision-making data to help them make those decisions. And I think the lessons learned, and I was reflecting recently on the lessons from the COVID Circle initiative, is all those areas that we refer to as the enablers of the research, and namely, the fact that we need partnerships in place, and not just at a time of crisis, but partnership needs to be built, patient partnership and equitable partnerships. The role of transdisciplinarity as well, tools like this tracker show the gaps, the trends, and where investment needs to be directed. And it can show areas that are not necessarily neglected, but that have less funding invested in them. So, and the importance of transdisciplinarity is something that really showed during the pandemics. The need also to invest in research capacity strengthening is something that was often cited as a barrier to effective research, but the capacity was not in place. And I think mostly the main takeaway is that actually where there's a will, there's a way. And that coordination needs to be in place, but not just when we hit a pandemic. It's something that should be continuous in the background and that we should be aware of and support.
It's about building systems, right? Yeah. Val, I'm going to come to you. Similar question, sort of for you, what were the sort of key takeaway lessons regarding the use of evidence during COVID?
Oh, thanks very much, Nina. Hopefully people can hear me okay. My name is Val Snewen. Hi, everybody. I'm the head of Global Health Research Partnerships in Department of Health and Social Care. Our research funding arm is the National Institute for Health and Care Research, NIHR. And so some of you may be aware, NIHR was really instrumental in conducting some of the large definitive trials, some in this country and some with partners around the world in COVID. And for the last few years, we've also had a significant global health research arm funded both through NIHR and also in partnerships with other funders. So what have we learned? Well, certainly my perspective is that through our partnership activities, when COVID started, working with our partners in MRC, Medical Research Council, we launched a specific call for funding research relevant to low and middle income country experiences based on the WHO policy, the WHO research roadmap. So addressing specifically elements of that roadmap. And it was very amazingly kind of an add-on value, if you like, of that was in a way the COVID Circle project. And hats off to Alice and also Marta Tufet, who was Maggie's predecessor, for really grasping an opportunity that where we were asking for various coordination functions, bringing cohorts of researchers together, they really drove that COVID tracker on the back of that opportunity. And so I really want to say hats off to everybody involved with that for now getting us to where we are today from that start, really. So what did we learn? Well, I think from the perspective of a research funder, I think we definitely learned the importance of high quality, synthesized, sometimes rapid, but sometimes in just normal times, accessible and relevant research evidence. I think we didn't just learn that from COVID. I mean, from the days from HIV, from Ebola, from COVID. Nina, you said to us this morning that health emergencies happen all the time, and they are happening all the time. So I think the second point I'd make here is from a research funder perspective, it's the long-term research capability that some of us are just as interested in strengthening. And in particular, clinical trials capability in the settings where outbreaks often happen. So I guess that's what I would say is with our UK partners, but also around the world with GloPID-R funders internationally, we're really capitalizing on, never waste a public health emergency, is a phrase often said in sad circumstances. But it has given us that platform, I think, to be where we are today. And I feel that the Pandemic PACT database, which we've been involved with funding both through EDCTP, our partners in EDCTP, and also through UKCDR, the Pandemic PACT database, I think, will be an amazing resource for us all to be better prepared to drive that capacity going forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. And a very, very important point there, that this is not just for future emergencies, it's also for current emergencies. I mean, WHO is responding at the moment to 42 graded emergencies, many of which are protracted crises that go through acute periods and less acute periods. But emergencies is not something that has receded for millions of people around the world. And so this is critically important work, and it's relevant work, and it's urgent work that needs to move forward. And Josie, I'm going to come to you because we spoke earlier about the uniqueness of this tool. And I wonder if you could comment on that.
No, thank you. So I'm Josie Golding from the Wellcome Trust, and I work in the infectious disease team. And we've engaged through UK CDR, through the COVID Circle at the very outset, and help support that development as it grows into the Pandemic PACT. You know, Wellcome, as with other funders, support the development of other tools that help track research decisions and investments into particular pathogens, particular diseases. And I think it's been really great to see how the Pandemic PACT team have really worked with those other tool developers on how they can have the intersectionality between the two, make sure they are interoperable. And that I think has been great to see that continued work. You know, but one thing I would always add is that it is a tool, and it has to be used in combination of a variety of other data points that will ultimately help people, whether it be a funder or other organizations, to decide what are we going to advocate for and what are we going to also make research investment decisions based on that. So it's never just the research on itself. It provides a great opportunity for us all, I think, and Alice has already stated those types of opportunities, you know, to reduce the duplication, I think, but also to set the ambition of what we use this for. So when we use it in an outbreak response, the COVID tracker was great to show that actually there wasn't much investment happening, particularly on animal research and reservoirs and transmission, and it remains a constant gap. And that raises a big question of why is this so challenging to invest in this space and fund in this space? And that's just an example. That is an opportunity to then build it into the everyday type of funding that we do, whether it be on epidemic-prone diseases, whether it be on other endemic diseases. So I think there's those opportunities. And as always with any tool, the risks associated with them. I think the Pandemic PACT team have talked about how they're going to try and address those particular risks of it not actually suiting the needs of the end users. So that continuing evolution of what is it going to be used for, how can it be used for? Because, you know, a lot of the ecosystem is changing on epidemic preparedness and response and what people and funders are wanting to invest in, the intersectionality with environmental change and climate change. How does that fit into it? And then, of course, I think a big message I had this morning in the advisory group is the risk of poor quality data to help inform those insights. So I think that's something we really need to be committed to improve the data so that we can use it to inform our decisions as we go forward into epidemic preparedness and response.
Fantastic, great. Really important points. Really important to be thinking also about the risks attached, but also the end user perspective. And I know, Dudu, I'm going to come to you next because we've had conversations about the use of these data by GloPID-R at regional level. Could you share with us some of your examples?
Thanks, and good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Dudu Zilindwandwe. I'm from the South African Medical Research Council. I lead the GloPID-R Africa Hub, which was launched last year. So we are a new baby amongst all the other working groups. But I think, looking at the Pandemic PACT work, you've seen in the presentations this morning, we've been really involved in how we can provide some kind of regional expertise because we want to respond from a regional perspective. And I'll give you an example, a recent outbreak, an outbreak that is currently ongoing, the Mpox in DRC. We work very well with the Pandemic PACT team, just collating the data and understand what is happening on the ground and coordinating funders and get stakeholders on the ground to come and speak to funders. So the hub serves even as a platform as well to have funders as well as stakeholders that are going to be the end users of the evidence that is provided by the Pandemic PACT tools and the information, but more so also the funders in the continent and also globally to understand what are the gaps in research? How can we prioritize the research needs that addresses the needs for the African continent at the moment? So those are kind of the things that the hub can play a role in terms of coordination and looking back into what has been happening in COVID and what we are currently seeing now, even with the MPOX experience. We see that there's a lot of activities that are going on, but there seem to be fragmentation. How can we come together in one platform where we can speak in unison and come with one solution where funders can contribute and also researchers on the ground can respond appropriately, understanding the gaps and the needs?
Thanks. There's sort of two bits that you've highlighted there. One, the importance of coordination, similar to what Maggie was talking about. But then secondly, this importance of sort of engaging researchers as well. And I know Alice spoke to this as some of the key stakeholders within Pandemic PACT. But there's this additional sort of piece that's about the engagement between not only researchers, but other agencies and groups that work at very local levels to deliver research, very often very responsively to health emergencies. And very often the key questions, certainly that I and my team get, are key questions of what tools are around, how do I use those tools, and what people are available in country to support the work that I do in this response. And that isn't something that can wait. So understanding where the research activity is allows us then also, from my perspective, to think about how you engage the researchers and the policymakers or the decision makers to really strengthen the evidence into practice link, which is, I think, the key gap that needs to be closed. Thank you. And Hans, I'm going to come to you, speaking more from GloPID-R policy level. What are your reflections on how this tool can be most useful?
As GloPID in more general, so I don't believe that people perhaps are so familiar with GloPID-R. So I'm the director of GloPID-R. We are currently being supported by Charité, University of Medicine in Berlin. So I'm a neighbor of Oliver, and occasionally schlep myself to the hub to be part of some of the activities there, and hopefully also more activities in the future that create an interface. So GloPID-R is not so dissimilar to UK CDR. Again, a network, while not being a funder itself, bringing together funders in order to help making smarter investments decision, if you like. And of course, in this case, there are two elements to it. It's what to fund, but increasingly how to fund. So it's not, so the what to fund is very clear, that where Pandemic PACT comes into. And as an example, even from the COVID tracker for us, as Josie already said, in the blueprint priorities, the animal origin part was really unfunded. It was the most unfunded, I believe, of all the 9 areas. And that, for example, led us to pair up with another European Commission-funded network, Star IDIS, on animal health, to start up a joint, which was a first for us, a joint One Health working group. And we want to, akin to the Living Roadmap on coordination of funding for clinical trials, to see how we can create a better interface between the funded and the funded, because at the moment there are issues how that is being funded. So we are halfway through to that. But in more general terms, of course, one needs to remember that the Pandemic PACT is a very important and a wonderful tool, but also part of other activities. So that we embarked about 2 years ago on 4 major projects, 2 led really by Alice and her team, and the others one were more led by the other side. And one important issue here to mention, and this touches on the how to fund, where Val is heavily involved in leading on it with our support, is to really develop a platform for coordinated funding. So this is not joint funding in the sense that you put money in a pot. No, this is synchronizing, if you like, the financial firepower, but on a specific agreed topic. And for that, you need evidence. What topic you want to adopt, what is being underfunded, where are the research gaps? And this, again, with the current example where we are working on, so the first call that we want to open later this year, again, a lot of the information came from Alice's team and then was fed back to the membership. And we have now what we call the group program team, where we have those funders that want to be part of the first call that are informed already through Pandemic PACT, and we develop it on that. And of course, you need, again, sort of a review process, checks and balances, which we are building in now. But it's already two practical examples how we use that in order also to address the how to fund. I think we mustn't lose sight of that. So I think I rest my case with that. I just realized I'm the only one who didn't bring his notes. So hopefully that was sort of vaguely coherent without my notebook.
That was indeed coherent. Oliver, I'm going to come back to you because I'm mindful we don't have a huge amount of time left with you before you need to go to the gate. So my question is, what would you see as the main added value of Pandemic PACT once the tool is built and ready to be used for better response to current and future health emergencies?
Yeah, thanks, Nina. I think, well, we've already actually been working very closely with GloPID-R, and I think actually, even though the PACT is being launched today, I think we anticipated its utility already. In the hub, we've been working in a consortium with GloPID-R, Wellcome Trust, the Charité, and also the WHO Science Division to develop a research prioritization for public health surveillance related to health emergencies. And that's kind of a challenging proposition because of the breadth and scope of what public health surveillance works on. And we're quite a long way through that process now. We hope to finish that by the end of May. And be published soon after, soon around the end of May, beginning of June. And one of the issues that we thought about really at the very beginning when we embarked on developing research prioritization is how we're going to measure progress against those priorities that we define. And this was a conversation that we had with Alice and Hans and a number of others. And the PACT mechanism, the PACT tool, it's a great opportunity to look at one dimension of that, which is where is the funding flowing. So as we develop our priorities and around where we think critical areas of research are needed for stronger public health surveillance around the world, we're going to be able to work with the PACT, with the PACT tool and the team to look and see, is funding flowing towards those priorities? Can we engage with other actors and stakeholders to increase the amount of funding for research into those areas? And then we'll also need mechanisms to see how successful that funding is and the impact of that funding as well. But I think this is a critical component of, setting priorities is one thing, but being able to measure progress against delivering on those priorities, and indeed whether the priorities are actually being prioritized themselves, I think is going to be critically important. So, like I said, we've kind of anticipated that the PACT tool is coming online, and we really look forward to seeing whether or how we can drive our priorities and measure progress against those priorities with the PACT team.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Oliver. And I'm mindful you'll need to leave us. So please do go ahead as and when you need to.
Thanks very much. Thanks to everybody in the room. Sorry I couldn't be with you today. Thanks.
Not a problem. Thanks. So we've spoken quite a bit now about the value of the tool, the potential uses of the tool, but we've also spoken about the importance of getting good data. And what do you think, in what ways do you think we can incentivize funders to provide good data, to build a good system that is sufficiently comprehensive to do the work of Pandemic PACT? This is an open question to anybody on the panel.
Well, if I may ask, so from a more general point of view, we discussed it earlier when we met as a group that there's a need to standardize the input so that the input can be done directly by the funders themselves. And I think they have their own vested interests to actually know themselves what they are investing in and also being able to compare it with other funders. So I think there's actually sort of a self-motivation there if you sell it properly. Through and also through the standardization makes it, of course, then easier to get better data input into the system itself. But I think there's a trade-off for them because they want to know what they're funding, they want to know what the others are funding, they want to be able to compare it. So that standardization and the way the data are input would help themselves to in their own business, as it were, to navigate their portfolio a bit better, I would imagine so. So from that point, we need to exploit that So that there's a motivation at their end, and you're not just dragging them in, kicking and screaming, but they actually want to do it because it helps them.
Great, thanks, Hans. And I'm gonna ask Josie and I'm gonna ask Val the same question.
Want to go first?
Yes, please.
Thanks, Hans, and thanks for the question. I think as somebody who's worked in a number of different research funding agencies in my career, I would say that the starting point for all funding agencies is very different. And funders who've been around a long time don't necessarily have the best IT systems as the very nature of longevity. And I just wanted to say that for me, I feel that the team here, and some of whom are in the room here, have really been groundbreaking in the way that you've led the more kind of artificial intelligence data scraping, crawling into all of our back end and front end, as I think Alice put it, across really a lot of different organizations. I suspect that's probably the first time that that's really happened. And so as a bit of a proof of concept, this is a portfolio of diseases, which we've seen on the slide. That's great. Of course, many of us fund much more diverse portfolios than that. Not even infectious disease, not even health. So it's a start, but I feel that colleagues, not just in our organizations here, but around the world will be looking at this to understand. And I think it's also really worthy of great applause and note that it's all open access, and that is one of the principles here. And so I think that this is just the start of doing exactly what you've been talking about, Nina, and I agree with Hans's comments. You need to show value for those types of activities. I feel that this Pandemic PACT database is really going to be important. I'm sure many colleagues will want to come and talk to all of you here to understand what you've been doing and build on that so that they don't need to reinvent the wheel. They can maybe start to incorporate this into their own systems, especially as systems get updated and renewed. Thanks.
Fantastic, thank you. And Josie, I'm going to come to you with the same question, and this might be, you don't need to answer this directly, but I'm also thinking about equity. You know, how do we make sure that this is a system that then can also drive, to some extent, equity in funding decisions? I'm mindful, I thought the question about language was a very smart one, you know, and it points to the risks as well, potential risks.
So I guess two points is has to benefit the funder. I think what Val said, we have portfolios that are far bigger than the tiny percentage of funding that goes towards epidemic preparedness and response. So whatever the data you need has to fit within the system. And if there are differences that are requested, it's about how you're going to pitch that, how it adds value to the greater way that we collect our data. Particularly technology is evolving. So there are opportunities now to take on board, you know, AI and other types of ways of doing it to help those organizations. So these are organizations that already share data. And we have a system to be able to do that. I think there's a different starting point when you're working with organizations who don't systematically collect this data. So that I can't answer. But I can say from a welcome perspective, I think showing benefit. So, and the second point, what that benefit is that linkage to impact. I think that's great to see how you can actually pull through from what's been funded for a particular grant and instantly see these are the publications that's come from that. And, you know, who knows where that could go to policy, grey literature in the future. So I think showing that added value, that is something funders really want to know. Often, what is the impact of the funding that we've made? So I think kind of being a pioneer in this space to show that, I think would be really helpful. Equity, I think, again, it's about what we're choosing to collect. You know, from a welcome perspective, we now have a breakdown in all of our grants to say, where is the funding flowing to? Where is it going to? This is something only in the last few years that's happened. That's a starting point to definitely understand the benefit if it's going through particular administrative organizations that we know it's reaching. But, you know, again, working with the broader community, and what other metrics do we want to see within that? For us, I can't think within the grants that we collect, we have any standardized way of saying, this is the percentage of capability strengthening we include. You know, it's very hard and fast data, you know, gender, location of the research in countries. So I think there's a lot that we could do, but I think it will take time.
Fantastic. Thanks very much. I wonder if anyone else on the panel has a comment on equity in particular. Judy.
So I think the question I'm reflecting as we're having the discussion, and I'm looking at the clinical trial registry data. And when we are talking about funding, the funding data, it's often not available. How do we make that transparent as funders so that we can have some form of equity to understand what are we funding? What, in the clinical research that are conducted, and particularly in Africa, how can that data be pulled into, the Pandemic PACT system in a systematic way with a transparent kind of like funding? Because that data is not there, and it speaks to what Josie is saying, that it's difficult to pull that data. So I think before we even get to the equity, I think us as funders, we need to be transparent and have, kind of like information about what we are funding, be transparent. And in that way, we have better sense of how we can address the question of equity.
Thanks, Judy. Val.
Well, and I'll just maybe pick up on the equity point. And so WHO are currently in the process of implementing the World Health Assembly resolution on clinical trials. And a big part of that is looking at equity in not only who's enrolled in those trials, but also who delivers, who leads those trials. And that's something very close to our heart in NIHR. And I would say that as relatively new to the global health, NIHR has been going longer, but in the global health portfolio, we've only been going since around 2016. So we did have the opportunity to build in some of the equity elements that Josie is talking about for Wellcome, much longer established. And so we do track, right from the beginning, we tracked exactly where the money goes and who leads on all of those awards. And we've also worked with fantastic partners right from the get-go, like EDCTP, who've been funding clinical trials in Africa for 20 years. And one thing that I learned when I went to WHO at the end of last year for a meeting around that clinical trials charter was that actually the number of clinical trials sponsored in the language of clinical trials, as in really properly led by the partners in the low and middle income country context, is actually very low. And even with partners like EDCTP, who Lara's in the room here, have been funding for quite a long time, only in sub-Saharan Africa, that is quite low. So from an equity perspective, I think that it's been a great opportunity actually for us all through things like Pandemic PACT and GloPID-R and the more sharing together of what we're doing, to actually open that box up a bit and think, right, what do we need to be doing differently with the way we fund and the way we track data and the way maybe we present and share data to make it a stated aim that as an impact or as an outcome of what we're doing, that the percentage of trials, both with people from a more vulnerable or a less well-resourced perspective, are involved with trials and clinical research, but in particular in our interest is in leading them and being able to have the institutional and individual leadership support to transition that much more. So when outbreaks and emergencies happen, data can be presented, can be produced locally, used locally, and much more kind of responsive. And I really think that, again, the Pandemic PACT database will be a great way to also have that opportunity to kind of open that up a bit and have a look at what's going on in a way that, which I agree with Dudu, isn't actually that easy, even with clinical trial registries, even with what's existing. It's not that easy, and I've also had a go at looking into that myself. So I'm delighted, really, that this is being done.
Fantastic, great. Yes, I'll take Hans and then...
There's also another aspect which also touches upon equity. I mean, to really try and look into that, you have to define what you mean by impact. I mean, having a paper out, in my view, is an output. And if we could actually use that tool to extend, and we had discussions about it, and we know how difficult it is, could you actually sort of trace it beyond the output? What actually then turns into application, be it in the grey literature, changing clinical practice, policy paper, and so on and so forth. And I think in that moment, you can actually probably get a better idea who's actually benefiting, because at the end of the day, this should all be about health benefits, right? So to improve the health of populations. And it's so difficult to evaluate that. But if we could, I mean, in the future, again, with AI and machine learning, to actually see how you can trace that, I mean, that would be then, it's a huge challenge, I know, I mean, but that would be really then enabling us to make an even better decision and actually see how that sort of extends beyond the Lancet paper or the Nature paper and so on and so forth.
Fantastic. I'm going to come to Maggie, and then I am going to invite some questions. We were not going to take questions, but I have a sense that there may be questions in the room. So I'm going to offer opportunity for questions, and also online. Folks, if you've got any questions, please let us know. Maggie.
No, it was just in terms of equity and reflecting on the funders' principles that Alice presented earlier. And the first principle was in terms of addressing the global research agenda, but also locally identified priorities and reflecting on the COVID Circle initiative. I come across the fact that, in the first year, money was going mainly in high-income country to fund research there. And then we started to see a shift in funding from year 2. And I think that's a sort of trend that a tool like PACT can show as well. And it's, again, this idea of, well, if you don't know, you don't know, right?
Yeah.
So as long as you don't have the input from the funders, you can't know where the funding goes. And the first step is always the most difficult. So now we do have a proof of concept. And I think UKCDR is involved in a lot of data mapping project. And I think there is an appetite from funders to actually showcase what they do. But I think the difficulty is in terms of having data that are comparable and to get those data. But I think there is an appetite, and the most difficult is just to come with a proof of concept and also analyze the data so that we can show what can be done with those data, because leaving a big tool like that in the hands of people, they can, data is only valuable if you've got context around the data.
Yeah.
So I think providing example of data analysis and that can be contextualized and put into practice is also very promising from that tool.
Fantastic. Thank you. Really important, actually, suggestions around the next phases of this work and just signposting to the Pandemic PACT team. But just wanted to open the floor to anybody in the room if you have some questions or reflections or comments on the discussion that's been taking place so far. Or indeed a reflection on whether there's any perspectives that are missing in the discussion so far. Spoken a lot about the perspectives of funders and how they would use the tool. We've spoken a bit about how policymakers might use this tool, a bit less about how researchers might use the tool. And I'm wondering if there are researchers or any folks in the room who are wondering how they would make use of Pandemic PACT as a tool, or indeed online.
Question over there.
Thank you.
Is there a mechanism for receiving kind of feedback from maybe students or researchers over time and then incorporating that as time goes on, even on an ad hoc basis?
Fantastic. So thinking about students, thinking about researchers, this is my reflection as we're having this conversation, is that there are many, many, many end users who would find this tool valuable. And I'm speaking more from an operational perspective, thinking about in an emergency, you want to know which research groups are active and where, and what protocols are they using, what data collection tools do they have. So you don't have to wait until the end of a funded study for that investment to have added value. And so, I think we do need to spend some time talking about the added value to the end user by unpacking this with many, many different end users. And I think it's an exciting start to the conversation, particularly when we think about all the investment, all of the work that's already gone into Pandemic PACT to make sure that, really the full added value and full added benefit can be realized. I'm mindful we're running out of time. So I am going to thank the panelists, and I am going to bring the discussion to a close. But thank you again for all of your insights and the rich discussion.
And thank you, Nina, for expert chairing. Thanks so much. All right. So, the meeting is coming to a close. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. I'm going to pass over now to Dr. Anna Kinsey from the UKRI MRC, who is one of our GloPID-R board members, to make some final closing remarks. And I'll see you all outside afterwards. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Alice, and thank you to all of the presenters and the panel, and to all of you for coming. So I'm Anna Kinsey. Some of you may know me as Head of Epidemic Preparedness at the UK Medical Research Council. This is the first occasion that I'm speaking to you as a newly elected board member for GloPID-R. And as such, I'm really honoured to have been invited to give these closing remarks for such a important launch under the GloPID-R umbrella. So GloPID-R brings together funders from around the world that invest in research related to new or emerging infectious diseases, and it aims to facilitate coordination among funding organisations that invest in research to both improve epidemic preparedness through collaboration, policy development, and developing and enacting shared research agendas, and to facilitate rapid and aligned funding of research in response to an outbreak emergency. And I think it's clear from what we've heard today how critical Pandemic PACT will be in forwarding GloPID-R's mission. So GloPID-R currently has 35 funding members and 8 observer organisations from across the globe. And I'll just say now, we encourage you to get in touch if you'd like to find out more about joining GloPID-R. The UK MRC is a long-standing GloPID-R member, and we provided critical early financial and in-kind support for the COVID Circle initiative and the COVID-19 research tracker. And they're the predecessors, as we've heard, of the Pandemic PACT programme, and which we then used to inform funding decisions over the course of the pandemic. So given that COVID was a pretty challenging test case for Pandemic PACT or its predecessors, it's great to see how these initiatives have evolved and to witness today how the various elements of Pandemic PACT have come together. So even before today's launch, it's already been proving its worth by tracking existing research investments in MPOX against the current needs to identify research priorities as part of a briefing to GloPID-R members just last week about the current MPOX outbreak in the DRC, and that was led by GloPID-R's Regional Africa Hub, which was chaired by Dudu. So for this and future infectious disease outbreaks, Pandemic PACT will help its users in identifying research priorities. It'll help to reduce duplication and improve research effectiveness and efficiency. So I want to just, I suppose in my final remarks, on a personal note, many years ago in my first job after leaving the lab, coincidentally, I was Europe PMC's engagement manager, and we've heard Europe PMC mentioned today. And my role there was to raise awareness of Europe PMC and its features among the researcher community. And in that role, I had to attend a number of quite technical operational meetings between the developers, text miners, talking about, quite frankly, complicated technical developments that I then had to sort of translate to the users of Europe PMC. So I very much stress that does not make me any kind of expert in any of this, but I think it does give me some insight into what a huge and complicated task it is to build Pandemic PACT. And I really want to congratulate Alice and so many of you who are here, and the Pandemic PACT team, and I think also the foresight of the current funders for their support. So I'll thank you again for coming, whether that's here in the room or part of, I think, a much larger community who's joined us online. It's really important that you're all here to hear about Pandemic PACT. And I hope that you'll all help in its future success by spreading the word. And I'll just quickly pick up on one of Josie's points in terms of the data, because we've obviously heard about this fantastic tool and a number of funders are providing their data, but I think the tool is only going to be as good as the data that goes in. So that needs to be comprehensive and it needs to be high quality data. So also do get in touch, I think, if you'd like to share your data with the Pandemic PACT team. So as we've heard, it'll be useful to so many, whether you're a researcher, funder, policymaker looking to identify and hopefully fill an important research gap so that we're better prepared for future outbreaks. So I'll just finish there by thanking you all once again for coming. And I believe a recording is going to be made available after the event in case you want to go back and listen to some of the important points that were made today. And as Alice said, there is now a reception for those in the room just outside this room. So thanks very much.